Alright guys, the wait is finally over as we yet again have a brand new chapter of My Hero Academia to enjoy. And this video in particular is a pretty special one because a ton of you guys sent in your artwork to be featured in it. So thank you so much to everyone who participated. There was a whole lot of artwork and it was all just so nice to see. You guys are really creative, really capable, and so make sure to stick around to see all of it. Or at least as much as we could put. With the previous chapter, Ida was holding onto Deku and refused to let him go, as they would subsequently be caught by Kirishima from below. The rest of Class 1A would then catch up and again advocate for Deku's return, which would then seem to be met by one final spark of resistance. But just then, Bakugo would come to the forefront and recount the moment from the war arc in which he sacrificed himself being impaled by Shigaraki in protection of Deku. What he told him at the time was to stop trying to win on his own, but now he had more to say. First, that in the moment, his body moved on its own. He would then speak of their shared past in which he constantly looked down on Deku for being quirkless. But despite the fact that Deku should have been beneath him, he could not shake the fact that he might very well be ahead of him, which was infuriating, and as a result, he bullied him and tried to keep him down at all times. But in the end, it never really worked. That even in UA, nothing had gone according to plan, and for the last year, he had been made to see just how strong Deku is, and just how weak he himself was. He didn't expect this declaration to change anything between them, but he still felt the need to convey this, then referring to Deku as Izuku, something he had not done since early kindergarten. He would then provide a sincere apology to him. Bakugo would admit that Deku's path wasn't necessarily a wrong one, as it was the very same one paid by All Might himself, but at this point, Deku was barely standing, and ideals alone could not suffice. That was not the help that he truly needed. And so they were here to help him live up to those very ideals and surpass even All Might himself. At this point, Deku was at a loss for words, but would simply apologize to previously telling his friends that they could not keep up, as he would begin to collapse but was caught by Bakugo, who would then confirm that they understand. And so yeah, they had successfully gotten a hold of Deku. However, this was only just the beginning of the long and arduous road ahead of them. But they were at this time prepared for the challenge. From there, we would find ourselves outside of UA as Deku regained consciousness, and these students were guided by the Space Hero 13, whose mask was currently off. She would begin to explain the situation in regards to anti-hero civilians and whatnot, but the most notable thing here besides her face would obviously have to be the UA barrier, which was currently in use. Deku was still hesitant when it came to being here, but he would continue to follow them. They were then met by a crowd, or more accurately, an angry mob of civilians. They were furious and refused to provide Deku refuge. Fearful for their own safety, the idea of him remaining here despite being hunted by the villains was too much for them to bear. To this, Deku would simply begin to leave, but would then be stopped by Uraraka, who would assure him that it would be okay. They refused to let him go, and once again, the question of who saves heroes when they themselves are in need would be at the forefront of Uraraka's mind. With this latest chapter, we began with a bit of a flashback, or at least a continuation of one, as this is set during the same impromptu meeting of Class 1A, Principal Nezu, and Endeavor. It would then be expressed that although the UA barrier was impressive, it was important to attempt to understand the feelings of Deku. Ida would then say that bringing him back safely would serve to convince the civilians, as those within the barrier should feel safer as well, which I don't believe to be the most astute assumption, and perhaps this is just a translation error or something along those lines. However, Principal Nezu would make it clear to them that although he understands their feelings, they must not have their actions be swayed by their emotions. Looking at things objectively, Deku was at this very moment the most valuable asset to the heroes, but even still, there was certainly an inherent risk in bringing him back. He would then say that currently, UA possesses the greatest defensive technology in the entire country, with security comparable to that of Tartarus. Momo felt the need to interject, as Tartarus was easily pulled apart by Shigaraki, not to mention that he had already broken into UA once before. But it was actually for this very reason that Principal Nezu decided to upgrade the system with his own modifications. A feat that was very surprising, but he would also admit that it took a whole lot of effort. But that ultimately, if there were to be an attack on UA at this very moment, there would be no way for the students and civilians within to fall victim to the villains. That he will not allow any invasions to occur. That more than simply being a heavily armored fortress, UA can now move. And it was at this point that things became a bit questionable for me technologically, but I'll speak on that more in a bit. Nezu would then further explain that the school's grounds were split into smaller areas, each of which being driven by a separate motorized mechanism, and so with that, if anything were to occur, the areas would be moved underground, with defenses simultaneously heightening. More than that, the shelter moves on superconducting linear accelerators so that each area will be made to take a different path. And so to this, Kaminari could not help but compare this system to a mecha anime. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if this were to be the inspiration behind this for Horikoshi. But Principal Nezu would admit that if these systems themselves were to be destroyed, they'd pretty much be out of luck. And so it is for that very reason that the circumference underground was currently reinforced by 3,000 steel plates. And so if there were to be any disturbance detected within the plates, the system would immediately activate. The plates were also independently motorized as to at the very least delay any attackers, which would provide the shelter enough time to plan the safest path to take. And my goodness, this explanation just kept on going. Apparently, in light of the identity switch situation between Keimi and Toga, Yue began working with Shiketsu High to reinforce her school to nearly the same level as Yue. And so now, it is also possible to relocate several heroes by way of connecting routes to either school. And at that, Shiketsu was an impressive distance away. Tokoyami would then speak of how every countermeasure appeared to be intended to stop Shigaraki's decay from spreading further. But at the time of the cultural festival, there was no way to know that his quirk would come to operate in such a way. And so Principal Nezu's response to this would be that there was no evidence back then, that this was simply his intuition. And so that's why he had paid for everything himself, which just blew Kaminari's mind because we are talking about a whole lot of money here. And to further elaborate on this point, Endeavor would express that the principal has made incredible contributions to the education and development of quirks to the point where he is recognized worldwide. Principal Nezu would then lower his head and close his eyes, saying that a lack of understanding and a lack of empathy were only but a single step away. But if they move and work together, then one step could very well lead to a path forward despite the pain that it may bring. He would again make it clear that he believed Deku had a place here and would ask them all to do their best to bring him back. Now before we progress, I would like to talk about a few things. First of all, that was a very long and detailed explanation of the security system's inner workings, and it sort of touches on a minor issue I have with the world of My Hero Academia. The fact that the technology at times feels way too selectively advanced. Between things like this and the crazy things some support items can do, I have always found it a bit hard to believe that a quirkless person could not be a hero as well in the event that they were to properly be suited and trained. But yeah, this is just a whole lot of stuff, and honestly reading it wasn't the most enjoyable thing ever, but I am willing to believe that this was a necessary bit of exposition for the sake of later events. The more the UA barrier is spoken about, the more convinced I am that the school will be attacked one way or another. It's the same philosophy that came along with Tartarus. If you keep telling me how impenetrable these defenses are, I know this to be anime, they have to try. The only thing that truly keeps you safe in a story like this would be actual plot armor, not physical armor. With Shigaraki's decay now being as deadly and volatile as it is, thematically, there absolutely needed to be some degree of checks and balances. There needed to be something that would make it less effective, because if it was able to take out several high-end Nomu and seasoned heroes, it definitely stands to endanger our cast of students. And honestly, mass killing Class 1A is absolutely a no-no, plain and simple. And if I were to make any in-the-moment assumptions here, I would say that if Shiketsu is connected to UA, why not just target there? I think that especially because communications between the two schools have been spoken of for so long now, that it's all but definite at this point that they will be pressed as well. And I'll also say that the whole different route system thing is cute, but it makes no difference to Shigaraki, who can literally detect Deku at all times. So perhaps these civilians will be just fine, but Deku certainly will not be. As for Principal Nezu, his actions here were indeed a bit suspicious, but I don't want anyone to jump to any crazy conclusions off of this alone. His precautions related to Shigaraki were strange indeed, but this man has overseen the development of so many young heroes for decades. All Might, Endeavor, and even Best Jeanist were all students under his supervision, and so with Shigaraki at the time of his raid being such a stunted man-child, I imagine it was only natural for Principal Nezu to come to some degree of realization about him and the potential of his quirk. Lest we forget, the man is a genius and literally an animal with a quirk. He is not human, he is an animal. His instincts actually hold a good amount of weight. And I know he may kind of look like a rat, but we've literally heard this man's internal monologue on a number of occasions. And based on what we have received and seen of this character throughout all the story, he is not nefarious at all. But moving on, in the present, the civilians were still very angry and completely refusing to let Deku in, as Shigaraki could be right behind him. And through all this, Uraraka was still keeping close to Deku. They compare his power to that of All For One, and even question if he was a Nomu, as his mother, with tears absolutely flooding her eyes, would call out to her boy over the shoulder of Jiro's father as Bakugo's mom held her back. At the same time, Class 1B was together as Komori and Tetsu overlooked the whole situation from their windows, and Monoma held onto Eri. And what an interesting turn of events that is. From the dark side of UA to yet another protector of Eri. I love the development of Monoma for sure. I like seeing this different side of him. And I mean, even Ragdoll and Koda were here. The crowd would now question if the heroes really believed they could get away with covering things up yet again. The situation here was very intense. I mean, even after the disaster that came along with the villains and such, the top 3 heroes did lie to them, so I can't blame them for being angry right now. And it would also seem that a bunch of theorists, not us here at Plot Armor, but in the actual world of My Hero Academia, were able to piece things together in regards to All For One and One For All. 13 would then say that there were some who were convinced before, but now there wasn't any belief to be found here. President Mike would again call for everyone to calm down, as now approaching to take the stand, it was Best Jeanist. And do keep in mind that Best Jeanist was the number 3 hero, even while out of commission based on just how much the public once liked him. And to his presence here, they would yell out that they had come here because they trusted his words. Best Jeanist would respond to this by saying that UA is currently the safest place they could be, and that their lives were the hero's utmost priority. He would further explain that they planned to make the first move using Deku as bait to locate the villains. However, they were ultimately unable to effectively do so on account of just how few heroes were left remaining. That despite being the villain's biggest target, he was also the hero's greatest asset. That if he'd stay out in the field any longer by his lonesome, he would be dead by now. And although this may not be the best option, they didn't have much of a choice at this point. And during this very speech, we would have a shot of Shoto, Hawks, and a totally inconspicuous man that we have surely never seen before on account of his incredibly mysterious trench coat and non-revealing hat. This Endeavor shot killed me, honestly. Like, this man really just knows how much everyone hates him at this point, where he avoids showing himself entirely. Meanwhile, he has that big old scar across his eye. It's hilarious. But yeah, Best Jeanist would then ask them to allow Deku to stay here where he will be safe, so that he may be prepared to fight, as he needs to be in the best condition possible if they were to have any chance of turning things around. Now, at first there was a pause from the crowd, but quickly that came to be a burning animosity and aggression. They'd say that the country was the way it was because the heroes failed them. That now that they had failed yet again, they somehow expected the people to take on their burden. Best Jeanist only made them angrier, and it was looking bad. In fact, Deku's danger sense was firing off on all cylinders to the point where it was so overwhelming that he had to take a step back. Which is to say that these guys were just about ready to riot, as just then, Uraraka would leap over the crowd, having taken President Mike's megaphone. Many would notice this, including Bakugo and even her parents. She would now stand atop the school and speak to the crowd. She would begin by stating that Deku has a special power, and just then someone would attempt to interrupt her, but she would continue by saying that he left UA because he did not want to put any of them in danger, that they were the ones who brought him back. And Deku was now looking up to her as well. She would continue by saying that this power of his was a special one made to defeat All For One, that is why he is being targeted, that's why he had to leave. She would then ask if anyone had actually given him a good look, if they had seen the current state he was in because he had left to protect them, a sight that only brought more tears to his mother's eyes, as he was a painful sight to behold. Uraraka would say that Deku wants to do something to change the situation more than anyone, that he had kept moving for others despite knowing that he himself could be attacked at any moment. And from there, we would have the young lady he'd previously saved come to recognize him. Uraraka would cry out that although he possesses this special power, he was not a special person at all. And Principal Nezu, now accompanied by the likes of Cementoth and Electoplasm, would think to himself again about the first step being a difficult one. But even still, he knew in his heart that taking that first step at a time like this is sure to result in the birth of a true hero that will surpass All Might. And that was the chapter. Uraraka is really over here coming in clutch and holding it down. This chapter wasn't necessarily the craziest thing ever, but it was a step in the right direction. And so I'm sure we can all appreciate that at least. Honestly, there are just so many interesting characters all within this UA barrier right now that I am especially looking forward to interacting with all of them and even getting their perspective on all the current events. And man, I really want it to be known that Deku is All Might's chosen successor. I really and truly live for moments like that in shonen stories, and I hope it happens. If not now, then at some point at least. And speaking of All Might, where is that man right now? Is he still dealing with Stain? Is he still talking to Stain, or is he talking to Stain at all? I really wonder. Now, I know we already spoke about the UA barrier and such, but if they're taking in civilians, what is to stop some of them from actually being secretly affiliated with All for One? And in the case of someone like Toga, was to stop her from making her way into the school disguised as a civilian. The only thing I could say would be that she would need a whole lot of blood, at least for the sake of maintaining it for an extended period of time, so that might very well compromise her presence. In terms of the crowd, I know it may be frustrating as a viewer and actually knowing these characters deeply, but let's not pretend like it wouldn't go down like this exactly in real life. But at that, it's just going to make Deku's greatness that much more impactful. I mean, these people are absolutely necessary for his ascension to the title of greatest hero. You can't be the greatest hero if the civilians do not recognize you as such. For them to go from resenting and rejecting him to praising and respecting him, that will be oh so satisfying to see. But yeah, that just about does it for the discussion of this chapter, but we have to say that we really appreciate each and every member of the plot army that participated in this little art showcase of ours, and in general every member of the plot army at all. It truly does mean a whole lot to us having been able to see this community grow and flourish in the ways that it has, and as we approach that 300k milestone, and hopefully plenty more to come, we hope that we can continue getting bigger and better, bringing you the kind of content, enjoyment, and discussions that you deserve in the most positive environment possible. If you've yet to officially join, go ahead and subscribe to Plot Armor with notifications on, because when it comes to bringing you some of the best My Hero Academia content on the platform, Plot Armor has you covered. As always, I'm Sliceable Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.